Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to get started now. So I just wanted to say hello, good morning, good afternoon for those of us joining us, or maybe even good evening for those joining us from across the US and Germany and from other places and time zones. Welcome to the first iteration of our Labor for Palestine National Network teach-in series. This session is titled An Injury to Palestine is an Injury to All, Breaking Ties with the Israeli Histadrut. My name is Sherena Razek. I am a diasporic Palestinian feminist scholar, activist, and labor organizer, the former president of the Graduate Labor Organization at Brown University, and a co-founder of our union's Palestine Solidarity Caucus there. And I've been organizing closely with the Labor for Palestine National Network, along with the other panelists here today and some of our participants too, I'm sure, for the past 589 days of ongoing American-funded Israeli genocide in Gaza. As members of this labor collective, we understand that we have the right to refuse the colonial conditions of our labor and to oppose the use of our labor to colonize and exterminate another people. We understand it is our obligation as labor internationalists to dismantle the racial capitalist and imperial systems of domination at play wherever they are, because our dignity and rights as workers and as human beings are deeply interconnected. The old labor adage, an injury to one is an injury to all, must extend to all workers of the world if it is have any meaning beyond its status as a slogan. And that means unequivocally that this statement extends to every child left limbless from American manufactured bombs, every mother forced to give birth with no medication or hospitals to care for her and her new child, every father forced to face his children with no food to put on the table as aid trucks sit blockaded at the colonial borders Israel enforces around Gaza, every teacher and student with no schools or universities left to gather at and study in, every journalist whose press vest has been turned into target practice by the Israeli occupation forces, every prisoner languishing in Zionist torture dungeons, every healthcare worker risking their life to save lives. The list unbearably goes on. We have the right and the duty to organize to end this brutality funded by our tax dollars, enabled by our complicit employers, ordained by governments against the interests and calls of their constituents. Don't ever forget we're part of the global majority that stands with Palestine, or enabled, unfortunately, by cowardly union leadership who have failed to meet the urgency of this moment beyond hollow statements for over 19 months of unabated genocidal assault. It is absolutely our obligation as rank and file labor internationalists to respond to calls coming from Palestinian workers represented by the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions, who have in very clear terms asked of us and directly of American trade unionists to intervene in the flows of racial, social, and political capital, enabling the Israeli war machine to rage over our people in Palestine. Amongst these demands has been a long existent call to break ties with the Israeli Histadrut, which will be the focus of today's conversation. Our intention today is to develop and understand an understanding of what the Histadrut is, expose the ties established labor formations in the US and Europe and Germany specifically have long maintained with this racist organization, and most importantly, to think together about how and why workers across the world are calling for unions to break ties with the Histadrut and to build solidarity with the people of Palestine. During this political education event, we want participants to come away with four main lessons. The first one being a basic understanding of what the Histadrut is, its origins, its racist, genocidal, and apartheid politics, and its role in the ethnic cleansing and formation of Israel, and really its place at the heart of the Zionist project. Secondly, we want you to get an understanding of the links between the Histadrut and labor Zionism in the US and Europe, and particularly in Germany. Third, we want you to have an ability to identify and challenge the Hasbara or propaganda about the Histadrut so you can oppose these lies as they confront you. such as this farce that we as labor unionists should be acting in solidarity with a so-called socialist labor federation. Rather, we want to make clear the similarities between the Histadrut and its closest relatives, South African apartheid and racially segregated unions that have no place in our movements towards justice and liberation. And finally, and very importantly, we want to highlight the solidarity work of a global movement of workers organizing to break ties with the Zionist formation and share some tools that you can take back to your workplace and communities, including a recording of this panel, so you're empowered to challenge these ties at the union, local, your caucus, state, national, and international levels. So we're going to begin a panel discussion on the Histadrut, where I will have the great privilege of introducing our speakers. And at the end, we will open it up for Q&A and close with some materials for you to take back to your unions. I'd like to invite our participants to share questions through the Q&A function, should be at the bottom of your screen. You can share them now and throughout the panel as they arise. And I also want to note that we have some high-level German translations that were done by Elizabeth Koch and Claudio Feliciani, and we'll be sharing those in the chat for our German-speaking participants at the start of each panelist's discussion. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Manal Herzallah, who's the founder and president of the Arab American Union Members Council, a co-founder of the U.S. Palestinian Community Network, a plaintiff in the Taxpayers Against Genocide complaint recently filed with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to challenge Israeli genocide in Gaza, in which he has lost 43 family members, and a co-convener of the Labor for Palestine National Network. He will provide the historical background on the Histadrut and its foundational role in the establishment of Israel over the ruins of historic Palestine. Monado, thank you so much for being with us. I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks to you. Thank you so much for having me as part of this program. Such an ambitious program. I don't know we could do it in such a short period of time, but I really appreciate you inviting me and being part of this. I am going to be presenting a slides that is basically summarizing a comprehensive presentation out of like 52 slides, but I have summarized it into 10 slides only. I'm going to start by sharing the first slide. I believe I can do that. Got it? Okay. So the objective for this is really understanding the conquest of how labor Zionism functioned as a vehicle of settler colonialism and why it was the dominant strand for Zionism during the British Mandate period. Another objective is to understand the conquest of land and the conquest of labor as a core strategies of labor Zionism and their material consequences on the Palestinian farmers. Understand also the function of Histadrut before and after the Nakba. And finally, understand the Israeli workers, I mean, like the Histadrut representatives, quote unquote, have the always been will subjugate the Palestinian under Zionism. Oops. Okay. So before we begin, talking about Palestine has, as you see in the map, has a strategic location because of its position vis-a-vis Europe, Africa, and Asia. Connection the three continents through the land and waterways. Palestine was under the rule of various empires throughout the ages, and this was a party due to strategic locations, large ports, along with Mediterranean, and the fact that it bordered the Sinai, which facilitate the large proportion of global trade throughout the Suez Canal. So in exposing the myth of saying land without a people for a people without a land, wanted to, the name Palestine actually comes from the word Palestine, which is mentioned in 800 BC in an ancient Egyptian inscription. This land has always various names throughout the centuries, and the historian have used some version of Palestine of thousands of years. In the early 20th century, Palestine's native population was majority Arab Muslims with a significant Arab Christians population and a small Jewish and a Druze population. So we see this is important background to see the geography and the history of that. So do you realize the Zionist project, Jewish settlers embraced labor Zionism during the British mandate? Labor Zionist through establishing a Jewish-only economy in Palestine led by Jewish workers that was a majority for them. Labor Zionism is taking over Palestine's economy. The method was two. One is conquest of land, stealing as much land as possible for exclusive Jewish settlers' use. And two, the conquest of labor, excluding Palestinians workers from the labor market through the discriminatory hiring and violence. So Palestinian, that attachment of Palestinians to their land, it's really important. The connection is both spiritual and native land and culture, and material in terms of economical livelihood. So when Palestinians lose their land, they lose not only their livelihood but also their spiritual connection to the land. Palestinian songs, dresses, symbolize poetry, culture, all this reference to the land and geography and of the indigenous nature of the Palestinian. So prior to the creation of Israel, most Palestinians were dependent on their land for their livelihood and working as farmers. So creating the Jewish economy was really important for the settler colonial project of Zionism. Theft through expulsion and facilitating by the British. Land purchase for exclusive Jewish use. They will force farmers to sell their own lands by many ways to drive them away from their own livelihood. The results, basically, the Palestinians, farmers losing their livelihood and connection to their land. If you see the map here, you could see that in 1882, first Zionist colony, and 1947, the extent of Zionist colonization by end of the British mandate. So the British colonization was really helpful in supporting the Zionist movement at the early ages, way before 48, and continue to have the Israeli colonization throughout the years up to 1966, was prior to the annexion of occupation of West Bank and Gaza in 1967. So the mass employing of Jewish settlers into Palestine, you can see from the 18 to 1947, there was the immigration from Europe. And you can see the map here where Jewish population is, you can see it in the blue color, and Palestinians in the green under the British. The Jewish population in Palestine increased from 6% in 1918 up to 33% in 1947. And setting up a trade unions, that's where we start talking about Histadrut, like the Histadrut, to sabotage Palestinian worker struggle. So the results was like Palestinian workers faced deteriorating working condition in that period of time. So the Histadrut has employed many ways to sabotage, violence, and with the necessary collaboration with the British colonization. They established major enterprise, financial, transport, a service to exclusively employ Jewish settlers using international funds. Sabotage by burned down Palestinian produce. Sabotage joint Palestinian Jewish labor organizing effort. There was some sort of effort to have Palestinians and Jewish to work together in terms of like trying to get their workers' rights, but they were sabotaged by the Histadrut. In terms of sent Jewish terror gangs to threaten Jewish-owned businesses that employed Arab workers, spread anti-Arab propaganda throughout leaflets. Then also they played a major role in breaking the historical strike that was carried out by the workers and population, the whole population of Palestine in 1936. And it stood until the revolution, or the farmers and workers from 1936 to 1939, prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. This is important about the Histadrut rule during the Nakba, and it's called Plant Dalet D, which is a plant that was Zionist military plan to systematically cleanse Palestinian village from their native population. This is almost people hardly know about this, but the Histadrut members founded the Haganah, which is a Zionist militia that was important. That is really the Haganah and Ergon. They were they were responsible for massacres that took place prior to 1948. One of the most famous one that people know about is the massacre of Deir Yassin. There is other massacres as well during that period of time. They carried out the villagers and various war crimes, resulting in mass cleansing and ethnic cleansing. I remember those Nakba survivors. If any of you have had the chance to talk to any of the Nakba survivors, Palestinians, they will say, I myself had a conversation with my own grandfather who said that the massacre of Deir Yassin really played a major role on making people scared and fear, and they're able to leave their own houses so they won't happen to them like what happened in Deir Yassin. And that is, as you see, this is we are witnessing that and what's happening in Gaza at this moment. This is important picture that we see, and then anybody who would talk about Histadrut and playing a peaceful role in this, this is the chairman of Histadrut signing an Israeli missile used in the genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Support Israeli genocide. It will continue to be a mark against anybody who's trying to defend the Histadrut of what they're supposed to be standing for, or what they claim to be standing for. Discriminate against Palestinian Union members, wage theft. There's millions of dollars being stolen from Palestinian workers, lack of representation, punishing and threatening workers who go on strike. Worked consistently with the CIA to train operatives to hamper worker struggle in El Salvador, supported the apartheid in South Africa. Our brothers and sisters in Latin America are well aware of that, and they can really help us in exposing this historical role that the Histadrut played against the working class in Latin America and South Africa. So lastly, I wanted to end by saying that demands from the PGFTU and Palestinians to boycott and end all the relationship with the Histadrut, to support the arms embargo on Israel through targeting Maersk and divest from Israeli bonds. South Africa unions have declared that we must call for the isolation of Histadrut, Israel's racist trade union, which supports unconditionally the occupation of Palestine and the inhumane treatment of Palestinians, and end quote. I will end here my slides, and I tell you that we have a lot more to talk about. I'm be more than happy to hear your opinions about this, your input and your feedback, so we could make this presentation in a much more comprehensive way, and hopefully we will do more education about this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Manado. That was amazing and such brilliant, concise background and overview of this organization and its role in colonizing Palestine and its continued role in colonizing Palestine. Just want to remind our participants to use the Q&A function to ask questions. I did see a question there about the length of this teach-in. So it's going to be 90 minutes. So we should end, I don't want to say, sorry, the time, because we're all in different time zones, but 90 minutes, an hour and a half is our programming. And there will be time to go over your questions at the end. I'm very pleased now to introduce our next speaker, who is Claudio Feliziani, a filmmaker and researcher formed in 1980s Italian autonomous workers left. He's a migrant worker and active in the Stop Arming Israel campaign in Germany. And he's going to set the stage for the international stakes of this call and our shared demand to break ties with the Histadrut and why it's especially critical in Germany. Welcome, Claudio.
So thanks you for organizing. I'm very glad to be here. And so I speak from Berlin, Germany. I'm part of the Stop Arming Israel campaign here in Germany. The campaign answers to the call of the Palestinian trade unions and workers in Palestine. Here in Germany, we are connecting the anti-militarist networks with the Palestinian political community, one of the biggest community in Germany, with 100,000 Palestinians in Germany. We are connecting the political community, engaging also for the empowerment of solidarity in the basis of the German trade unions. Recently, together with Trade Unionists for Palestine, Gewerkschafterinnen für Gaza, we organized a series of debates events on the issue of Palestine solidarity in the German trade union. And we try to give them an historical perspective. So the starting point of our debate was a specific question. Why, in more than half a year of current genocide in Palestine, the DGB, the German Trade Union Federation, has not said a word about it, except for a statement of solidarity with Israel victims immediately after the October 7, 2023 Gaza uprising? Why has the DGB repressed in the basis of the trade unions any expression of solidarity with the Palestinian workers under genocidal aggression? We cannot find an answer to this question without talking about the historical partnership between DGB, the German Federation of Trade Unions, and the Israeli Histadrut. So we are dealing with the paradox here that despite constant exchange programs, educational trips, intensive public diplomacy between the DGB member structures and the Histadrut, the vast majority of German workers, when asked what the Histadrut is, even do not know what we are talking about. In such a situation, we agreed on a need of a political education campaign exposing, more than complicity, I would say, identity of the Histadrut with the occupation and apartheid regime in Palestine as a pseudo-union and true agency of colonization since the 1920s, pursuing the objective of the ethnic segregation of the working class in Palestine, which was very well described by Monedel in its slides. So we found interesting to focus on the role of the DGB in the interaction of post-war Germany with the State of Israel and the Zionist project. I found an article very interesting of the Heinrich Boll Stiftung, is the foundation Heinrich Boll, which is the foundation of the Green Party. And I will share in the chat the link in German, and afterwards also the translation. So in this article is described how in post-war Germany the relationship with DGB was part of of the process of something pretending to be part of the denazification project. I quote, "For the Israeli Trade Union Federation, Histadrut was not primarily about class struggle, but about building a Jewish Zionist state," end quote. Beyond the warfare of narratives, it's historically enough proven Mahmoud Mamdani gives a radically not Eurocentric insight on the failure of the denazification in a full chapter of his Neither Settler Nor Native, The Making and Unmaking of the Permanent Minorities. A book what I had the chance and the honor of translate to my native language, Italian. How in the frame of the Cold War, he's proving how in the frame of the Cold War and in the anti-communist reconstruction of the Federal Republic of Germany, the denazification was traded off against the unconditional political and military support to Israel. To make an example, the state secretary of Adenauer's government, the first government after National Socialism in Germany, was Hans Globke, who was one of the editors of the Nuremberger racial laws. It's interesting how the DGB, the German Trade Union Federation, embraced this collaboration, representing it as a contribution to the denazification, appearing to be setting a discontinuity with the National Socialist project, while embracing, actually, another ethno-nationalist settler colonial project in the Middle East. It is important for us, according to the aims of this webinar, to understand Zionism from its origins as a corporatist ideology, offering from its inception at the beginning of the 20th century its cooperation to both the European anti-Semitic elites and the anti-Bolshevik reaction to undermine from inside the revolutionary socialist majority of the Jewish diaspora, and offering, in addition to the British Empire and the European ruling classes, a colonial outpost in the Middle East. At this point, it's also worthy to make a reference to the work of Lenny Brenner, continued by Tony Greenstein more recently, investigating the diplomatic relationship between labor Zionism and Nazi Germany. There is unfortunately not time now to discuss the issue, but I just want to observe here now how until today the anti-Semitic extreme right wing in Germany, in the EU and in the USA, as you know, with the class interest represented by it, is also consistently pro-Zionist. Back to the post-war time relationship between Germany and Israel, the relationship with the DGB and Histadrut, we can see how it has less to do with the Nazification than with the open support to a social partnership, let's say a corporativist model that could replace the investment of the owning classes in that of the militarily defeated fascists. The labor Zionism, with its full mobilization and militarization of the working class for the national interest, around the promise of a share in settler colonial privileges, represented the second better antidote after fascism against class struggle and proletarian internationalism. This helps us in a better understanding of the roots of the German anomaly given by the so-called anti-German, anti-Deutsch movement as a top-down propaganda warfare, sowing division in the international solidarity and trying to sell the endorsement of a settler colonial project as an anti-fascist struggle. To highlight the historical legacy of these social partnership relations is for us today crucial to understand the current substantial alignment of the German Trade Union Federation with the German reason of state and military-industrial complex, with the unconditional support to Israel. To deal with these questions help us to try to understand in times where a ruling class is heading to the world war, what scope is still available for class interests that cannot be reconciled, and definitely for international solidarity among workers to take action from below against the current genocide in Palestine, the militarization of society, and the preparation for the upcoming World War. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudio, for giving us this really important historical perspective on Europe and Germany, on the collaboration of the Zionists with this fascist regimes in the past and into the present, of course. I want to introduce our next speaker, Lisbeth McManus, who is an actor and performer and a rank-and-file member of SAG-AFTRA and an organizer with Entertainment Labor for Palestine. She will share with us the US context of organizing against the Histadrut and in solidarity with Palestine. Thank you so much for being here, Lisbeth.
Thank you, Sherena. Greetings. I come to you as a union member concerned with the rights of workers and also as someone committed to social justice across borders and across systems of power. Today, this webinar is focused on a reality that we must confront, and that is the historic and ongoing relationship between the AFL-CIO and the Histadrut, and how that relationship must be confronted in light of the ongoing apartheid and genocide in Palestine. The AFL-CIO has long presented itself as a champion of workers' rights and justice. Similarly, the Histadrut has played a central role in the development of the Israeli economy and labor movement. But with this, we must ask, whose rights are being protected and whose voices are being silenced? With more than 214 journalists killed by Israel, and the AFL-CIO remains silent. SAG-AFTRA, an AFL-CIO affiliated labor union representing many broadcast journalists domestically, has not only remained silent, but has also refused to comment regarding the targeting of Palestinian journalists. The roots of the AFL-CIO's relationship with the Histadrut date back to the early years of the Zionist labor movement. In the 1940s and 50s, American labor leaders viewed the Histadrut not just as a union, but as a nation-building institution and pre-state in early Israel. Under the leadership of those like George Meany and later Lane Kirkland, the AFL-CIO developed strong ties with the Histadrut, seeing it as a progressive ally. Over decades, these ties were deepened through formal partnerships, funding initiatives, and mutual exchanges. Several US labor unions established direct relationships with the Histadrut, including the American Federations of Teachers, Service Employees International Union, United Auto Workers, and American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. These relationships were often framed as international solidarity, but they largely ignored the realities of Palestinian labor exploitation and exclusion under Israeli control. Even after the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, and despite mounting evidence of systemic discrimination, the AFL-CIO and its affiliates largely maintained these alliances. The relationships continued through the decades, even as global human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, described Israeli policies as amounting to apartheid. Recently, in June 2023, the Histadrut chairman visited the United States in a delegation arranged by the AFL-CIO International Committee and supported by leadership from the American Federation of Teachers and the Retail Wholesale Department Store Unions workers, among others. 1 year ago, labor unions from New York City were part of a delegation that met with the Histadrut chairman at their headquarters in Tel Aviv. The delegation included the executive director of DC 37 Union, New York City's largest public sector union, along with the president of a union that represents superintendents and administrators in New York City public schools. The same AFL-CIO that proudly stood in solidarity with South African unions during apartheid must now confront its complicity in another system of oppression. This is about accountability for institutions that enable systemic oppression. It's about holding our own labor movement to the same moral standards we claim to uphold internationally. In June 2024, when the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America made a solidarity statement with the Histadrut strike, UE workers in solidarity with Palestine noted that the statement on the surface was a show of international solidarity, but neglected to reference the Histadrut's complicity in the oppression and massacre of Palestinian workers throughout decades. As trade unionists, we say solidarity is not selective. You cannot pick and choose whose rights matter. If we're serious about justice, then we must be serious about Palestinian liberation too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lizbeth, for this crucial perspective on the roles, really on the major union leaders in the US and their complicity historically and into the present with the Histadrut and with labor Zionism more broadly. Thank you so much. I'm very pleased now to introduce our final speaker, Michael Letwin, a social justice activist since the 1960s, former president of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, UAW 2020-35, or 2235, excuse me, and a co-founder of Labor for Palestine. Michael is going to talk about why Palestine solidarity work is a matter of not crossing picket lines. Welcome.
Thank you, Sherena. And hello, friends and comrades. It's an honor to be here with all of you today. Sherena, Manadal, Claudia, and Lizbeth have laid out quite clearly how and why Palestinian trade union bodies have called on rank and file workers and union bodies around the world to boycott the Israeli so-called labor federation known as the Histadrut. And as referenced earlier, this was most recently reaffirmed on May Day of 2025 as follows, quote, "We, the undersigned Palestinian trade unions, call on workers around the world to escalate their support for our struggle to end the genocide and dismantle Israel's colonial apartheid regime by cutting all ties with the Histadrut and expelling it from all international fora," end quote. So in this context, the most fundamental labor principle, an injury to one is an injury to all, means that an injury to Palestine is an injury to all, as this webinar, in fact, is titled. And by the same token, the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, or BDS movement, is a picket line. And as rank and file workers and union members, we know that the first and most fundamental part about being a union member is that we never cross a picket line. We walk picket lines, especially when they are picket lines against the ongoing settler colonial Nakba inflicted on the Palestinian people since and even before 1948 all the way through today. Because what's going on today is simply a further extension and escalation of that Nakba. As you've heard today, the Histadrut is no minor player in this Zionist genocidal project. The photo of a Histadrut leader writing a message on missiles to be dropped in Gaza says it all. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, as you've heard. So let's now just sum up, in essence, this case that's been explained, this case against the Histadrut, which has used its false image as a, quote, progressive or even socialist institution to spearhead, whitewash, and otherwise project and inflict racism, apartheid, dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and genocide against the Palestinian people since it was founded in 1920. While we could not even touch on all of these issues here today, this indictment of the Histadrut includes, one, from its founding in 1920, its alliance with Western imperialism, not only to implant Zionism in Palestine, but also as part of the same project to attack workers' struggles throughout the world, and especially in Europe, including the Bolshevik Revolution of October 1917, to which it was promoted as an alternative. Secondly, its conquest of land and conquest of labor campaigns that Manadal outlined so clearly in the 1920s and 30s to make way for the Zionist state by evicting Arab peasants from the land and boycotting Arab labor and products. Third, when this provoked the 1936 six-month general strike that Manadal also discussed, but which, by the way, is the longest to date in world history, it supplied Jewish labor to replace striking Palestinian workers and then helped the British colonialists terrorize the Arab population and finally crushed the Arab revolt in 1939 after 20,000 Palestinian casualties and many others jailed or deported. Next, I forgot what the number is here. There's so many of them. At the same time, the Histadrut was collaborating with the Nazis in Europe to bring more Zionist settlers to Palestine, while blocking Jewish flight from Nazi extermination to anywhere else other than Palestine, and in exchange, sabotaging anti-Nazi boycotts and sabotaging alerts to the Jewish communities in Hungary and elsewhere who were facing extermination, which it knew about in advance. Next, its role in terrorizing and ethnic cleansing of at least 80% of the indigenous Palestinian population, subsequent and during and subsequent to the Nakba of 1947 and 48. Next, its leadership command of the new Israeli state, because let's not forget that for the first 30 years of that state, the Histadrut, through the Labor Party that it controlled, and vice versa, was the ruling party in so-called Israel, and its command of the Israeli Defense Force, in which it has played a key role, so-called Defense Force, in continuing and legitimizing ethnic cleansing and apartheid against the Palestinians. Next, its conduit for CIA and Mossad participation in colonial wars in Africa, and its cooperation with the AFL-CIO and the CIA in undermining and murdering popular movements in El Salvador and throughout Central America. Next, its near monopoly over Israeli trade, including weaponry with apartheid South Africa that included the provision of nuclear weapons to that apartheid regime. Next, its support for each and every Israeli war and occupation ever committed. Next, its ongoing segregation, exclusion, and/or exploitation of Palestinian workers in both the 1967 and 1948 areas. And by the way, I use those terms because we don't refer to Palestine, any part of Palestine, as Israel. Israel is not a place, it's not a people, it's a regime. It's a colonial settler regime that temporarily occupies historic Palestine. And this, by the way, includes during those attacks on Palestinian workers since 1948, reprisals against Palestinian workers in Israel, so-called Israel, in other words, the 1948 areas, who participated in Land Day in 1976 when the labor Zionist government shot and killed 6 Palestinian strikers. And of course, now that pales in comparison with what's been done in Gaza and throughout historic Palestine. And finally, at least in this brief summary, its ongoing role in opposing the BDS movement or any other resistance to Israeli genocide and camouflaging what that genocide looks like. So for all these reasons and many more, labor bodies in South Africa, the UK, Ireland, Canada, Norway, and elsewhere have honored the BDS picket line by severing ties with the Histadrut, but virtually no US labor body has done the same. And so the first question then is, why not? And in the brief moments I have left, I would just say that the short answer is that US laborers officials, a dominant officialdom, adamant Zionism has reflected on the right end of that spectrum in affinity with settler colonialism, imperialism, anti-communism, and racism abroad and at home against workers of color. And meanwhile, during the 40s and subsequently, labor leaders, even on the left, echoed Stalin's indispensable military and political support for the Nakba and establishment of the Zionist state. And so what that meant was that for decades after, all the way through to today, in large part, union leaders across the political spectrum have a long history supporting Israel's wars, in part through buying huge quantities of Israel bonds. Now, since the end of World War II, this labor Zionist consensus, whether people called it that or not, or recognized it as that or not, in US labor officialdom has been maintained largely by the Histadrut's US mouthpiece, the Jewish Labor Committee. And while similarly painting itself as progressive, the JLC has a long history of promoting Israel, US wars of empire, and domestic racism. Just one example of which was its role in attacking the New York City supporting the 1968 New York City teachers strike against community control of the schools and backlash against affirmative action. And today that's led by retail, wholesale, and department store union president Stuart Applebaum. And under his regime, the JLC has mobilized top union officials in this country and abroad to attack the Palestinian-led BDS movement. So finally, how do we try to change all that? Well, first, by reclaiming and rebuilding the long history of US rank and file labor anti-Zionism dating to the 1960s. So for example, in January 1969, the Detroit-based League of Revolutionary Black Workers championed the Palestinian struggle as part of worldwide resistance to racism and colonialism. And continuing that, in 1973, 3,000 Arab auto workers in Detroit led a wildcat strike with Black, white, and other support to protest the UAW Local 600's purchase of $300,000 in Israel bonds. This is during the 1973 war. And they led a protest also against B'nai B'rith's humanitarian award for then UAW President Leonard Woodcock. And so toward that end, and to continue to uplift those struggles and that legacy, in 2004, Labor for Palestine was founded to promote respect for the BDS picket line. And during the intensified Israeli attacks on Gaza in 2010 and 2014, ILWU, the West Coast Longshore Locals 10 and 34 in Oakland, began to refuse to unload ships from Zim, Israel's leading maritime shipping company, and soon after, UAW Local 2865 graduate students at the University of California, today known as UAW 4811, and the United Electrical Workers and a small number of other labor bodies adopted pro-BDS statements, often with vocal support from anti-Zionist Jewish members. Following renewed appeals from Palestinian unions in 2021, solidarity statements were issued by additional labor bodies, and Block the Boat, a community labor alliance first launched in 2014 by the Arab Resources and Organizing Center in Iraq, along with other campaigners, some of whom are here today, successfully prevented the Israeli ship Volans from docking anywhere on the West Coast, inspiring the Block the Boat campaigns in other US and Canadian ports that have prevented them line ships for the last 10 years and more from visiting the West Coast. In the immediate wake of Israel's genocidal attack on Gaza that sharply escalated on October 7, 2023, most labor officials still remain silent, or worse. But that same ongoing genocide, combined with mushrooming rank-and-file activism, together with the Black Lives, immigrant rights, and other movements of recent years, have produced unprecedented labor outcry against the carnage. Once again, the boss, in this case, the Zionist entity, has been the best organizer of resistance. Now, some of this resistance has come from above, including the 7 major unions that have called for a ceasefire and now even an arms embargo against Israel. And this shift from the labor officialdom's implacable Zionism has helped to encourage a growing number of labor bodies to speak out against Israeli genocide. However, as others here have already referenced, even these unions have failed to acknowledge the Palestinian trade union picket line, including its call to sever ties with the Histadrut, or to take any concrete steps to divest unions and employee pension funds from Israel bonds, or to stop the research, manufacture, and transport of US weapons, much of it produced by and in union shops, to Israel. And that, by the way, includes the union I'm part of, the UAW. But in the face of relentless US-backed Israeli genocide, that's not okay, which is why the Palestinian trade unionists recently said the following, quote, "We in the General Federation of Trade Unions in Gaza address this call to you on the eve of International Workers' Day, affirming that your struggle for workers' rights in the United States is inseparable from our struggle against occupation and colonialism. True labor solidarity is demonstrated through actions, not just words, and we count on your awareness and determination to take concrete steps to end this tragedy," end quote. That's in furtherance of that mission. That's why we have launched the Labor for Palestine National Network, founded in January 2024, to organize workers' unique rank and file power from below in our unions, communities, and workplaces to actually go beyond words and shut down Israeli genocide and settler colonialism through resistance to the bipartisan real escalation of Israeli genocide that we're now seeing in Palestine, and as well to Trump's parallel blitzkrieg of repression and destruction at home with democratic complicity all too often, or at least acquiescence, not only against Palestinian solidarity activists, but against all workers, unions, students, immigrants, people of color, women, LGBTQ plus, social services, education, science, free speech, and really humanity itself. And so finally, as part of that resistance, we invite both union members and as yet ununionized workers to first learn more about the Histadrut and labor Zionism by visiting laborforpalestine.net, where we have quite a lot of material there that addresses exactly what we're talking about here today. And I'm going to put that link into the chat. Secondly, to consult Steve Zeltzer's labor video channel on YouTube, which also has a tremendous amount of video and other material on the Histadrut in particular, as well as Palestine Solidarity in general. And then to mention also Jeff Shirky's upcoming book, No Neutrals There, U.S. Labor, Zionism and the Struggle for Palestine, which comes out on October 28th, and reference to which I'm going to post here in the chat as well. Secondly, to use Labor for Palestine's forthcoming model resolution, which will be calling for union and other bodies to support the Palestinian Trade Union BDS picket line, including the call to sever ties with the Histadrut. And finally, to please join us in the Labor for Palestine National Network, which consists of 53 member orgs and growing. And you can do that here. And again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for the clarity of these statements and the overview of the crucial role of rank and file organizing. Even the statements we've seen national federations make, even if just statements, are a result, direct result of rank and file pressure and power, because really the power is with the rank and file workers, and it's always good to have those reminders. I want to thank all of our panelists for these really informative and important presentations. I think this was a really fantastic first session. I know it can feel like we're just scratching the surface, which is why we want this to be part of a series. And a series that'll be useful for workers and unionists who are tuning in and who are organizing, doing the really, person-to-person organizing on the ground work that is required to build the kind of power we need to confront Zionism and its ties to racial white supremacy in the US, imperialism and settler colonialism across the globe. I want to open the floor to questions now from our panelists. I know we have some already that I will read for everybody. And we're all here, yes? Yes. Manadil had to step out, unfortunately. So I'll share some of these questions, invite panelists to respond, but also please feel free to continue asking questions using the Q&A function. I think we have around 20 minutes or so for this. So the first question for panelists, there was recently a Uni Europa Labour Conference in Belfast, which Histadrut attended, activists disrupted it, and I'm curious if you are aware of any fallout from that within Uni Europa. Is there any sign that they will shift their stance on inviting Histadrut to such events? If anyone wants to speak directly to this or otherwise, I know, Claudio, you're a natural contender to respond first, but Lisbeth, Michael, please feel free to weigh in.
What I can say briefly, yes, it was in Belfast was set we got the news, and it was a very powerful action, which made clear what is the relationship of the trade unions against Histadrut all over the world should be. But what I can say about Germany is that in the same time, the beginning of April, there was the 50 years of the partnership of the German Federation of Trade Unions, and we had the visit of the famous guy signing bombs in the Elbit system plant, who was in Germany, and I made an official visit to the direction of to the leadership of the German Federation of Trade Unions. And unfortunately, the power relationship were not such as in Ireland, as and there was no counter action. What we could do this year was instead of being marginalized again like the year before, the 1st of May to 2024. This time we decide for another strategy, and we disperse ourselves in the Federation May Day demonstration, and starting asking the questions where we were asking ourselves today. But yes, that's a connection. Maybe you can add some more on the issue.
Thank you, Claudio. Next question. Did DJB follow a similar policy to Histadrut's labor segregation against migrant workers in Germany, and specifically against Turkish workers? And a question similar related, I'll just ask it at the same time. Do all German trade unions have close relationships with the Histadrut?
I would say it's something coming from the top. Is a top-down relationship. So the diplomatic relationship with Histadrut are concerning the leadership and the highest rank of the German trade union. I was arguing before, most of the basis of the trade union are not even informed of this kind of relationship. At the moment, we are still waiting for a clear positioning of any of the German trade unions against Histadrut. And even against the genocide, officially against the genocide in Palestine, made exception for groups in the basis of the trade unions. They are constantly working to organize themselves and come out strategically in the long run. In Germany, there is an awful lot to do in this sense.
Thank you, Claudio. We have another question. Can panelists talk about the role of CWA and its support for apartheid Israel? CWA has 4 areas that directly relate to this genocide, and its silence and our direct complicity. The CWA News Guild has refused to defend the Palestinian journalists and have even failed to defend their own journalists who've been targeted for their Palestine coverage. The health and education sector, which includes 20,000 workers in the University of California, represented by UPTE, have also failed to support healthcare and education workers being killed in Gaza. That's absolutely the case of my own union, AFT, as well. And last but not least, CWA Alphabet workers, the IT sector, have denounced their complicity in the development of IT software that has served the military in targeting civilians and journalists in Gaza. And this participant also is drawing connections, trying to highlight the role, CWA's role within the AFL-CIO, which has been pretty bad since the 60s, in terms of collaboration with US foreign policy arm to intervene in countries such as Chile, etc. So would love to invite our panelists to respond on the CWA. Michael?
Yes, the CWA has, as the question pointed out, has remained essentially at best silent about the genocide in Palestine. And that's despite the fact that it presents itself as a progressive union. So again, we see that similarity with the way that the Histadrut and the JLC, the Jewish Labor Committee, present themselves. And of course, we support CWA workers as we do workers of all unions who are organizing and fighting for their rights. But the CWA leadership has not addressed this at all. And it's not even one of the 7 unions that have, at least on paper, come out for ceasefire and for an arms embargo. So I'm glad to say that there is a new group called CWA for Palestine, which is beginning to organize. And if you're interested in that, please do contact us at info@laborforpalestine.net, and we will connect you with the folks who are doing that. Because, what that shows, again, is that whether it's in the UAW or CWA or any other of the unions we're talking about, these movements have to come from below, either to get our unions to take a position against genocide, and then equally to get them to do something about the positions that they may have taken, as in my union, the UAW. So, please do contact us, reach out to us, and we will put you in touch.
Thanks, Michael. Anyone else? I just want to add to that also, just to second your point. We're going to be sharing out as a resource, which Michael mentioned earlier, model resolutions. So resolutions that you can take back to your locals, to your caucuses, to your national federations. And I know a lot of the big unions meet in the summer. And I've been a part of organizing within AFT to try and push these resolutions. It's not easy work. We really got the book thrown at us last summer when many of us for our first time were attending this convention and thinking that this would be a good faith engagement with rank and file to, have a member-led leadership of their unions. That's really not how these business unions at this level function. And so that's one of the resources we want to share with folks, kind of language you can use. And then maybe another session we can think about in the future is just fact sharing and experience sharing on, for those of us who have participated in trying to pass these resolutions, both successes and failures in that regard, I think are useful intel for us to share with each other. There's a question, where did it go? Because it's for Elizabeth specifically. Yes. So Entertainment Labor for Palestine has been doing fantastic work. Really second that and applaud the work you guys are doing. So what lessons do you have, Lisbeth, that could help other sections of organized labor emulate your successes?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I would say my advice would be to continue to organize. However, do not do it in a silo. Organize also with the community, figure out the points of unity, because you're not going to, probably agree with everybody on everything, but come together on the points of unity in which you can move forward, and realize at this moment it's going to take different strategies, not just one. So even with us, yes, we have a labor union that's been complicit, but we cannot just focus just on that. We have to, try multiple strategies. And within labor, it's important to also, do the coalition building, because, when you come to start talking about things as strikes, you need the community support, you need mutual aid. And if you're in labor, you're not talking about how to build mutual aid in community, that needs to be done. So that means getting out there, building relationships. I'm very big, and I definitely stress build relationships. And that's just not showing up for individual events. It's getting to know people, because you have to build trust in this moment. And that's what it's going to take to have any level of relative success. So again, just organize, reach out, coalition build, and again, think outside the box and not just within your industry and within labor.
Such important insights, Lisbeth. Thank you. This question's kind of related, and maybe all panelists might have some ideas in response, not specifically just this question, but broader about this coalition building that Lisbeth's talking about. So one of our participants is asking, what do you think about the JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace-led Breaking the Bonds campaign against Israel bonds? I don't know if anyone's been involved here amongst panelists. Or just want to build on the idea of coalition building and the importance of that as trade unionists. You can go ahead, whoever would like to kick us off.
Well, just to say that, we've, Labor for Palestine has called for breaking exactly those bonds since, we founded in 2004, and others, in fact, including Stan Heller, who I don't believe is here today, up in Connecticut, has been organizing about this, going all the way back to at least that long. So, we support all of these efforts. We've endorsed the JVP campaign, and it is particularly critical that it comes up in a number of different contexts. So Israel bonds are owned by governmental bodies, say like New York City, which owns a whole mess of Israel stuff, uh, but also other cities and counties and states and so forth, but also not just by governmental entities, but by pension funds, which are our pensions, and often, if we even have a pension, those funds usually have Israeli investments, including the bonds, and then the unions, which was mentioned earlier. So to sort of echo Elizabeth's point, this kind of crosses over, the union space, governmental spaces, community spaces. In the Bay Area, they've had a very effective campaign to stop or to get some of the Alameda County and others to say that they would divest from Israel bonds and Israeli investments. We have to definitely support all these things, and they're critical, and they're very concrete in terms of ways in which our unions in particular have been complicit and remain complicit. And I should also just add that as a member of UAW Labor for Palestine, which a number of people here in the call are part of as well, this has been a major issue in the UAW going all the way back, as I said, to the early 70s. So for the 50 plus years, the UAW has held and mostly refused to divest, even under the new Sean Fain leadership, which, is far better than any other leadership has ever been in the UAW, but nonetheless, and which has, supported even the student intifada and encampments by saying, yes, the university should divest. And yet we can't so far get the UAW International Executive Board to actually divest its own holdings in Israel bonds. So these, cut across all sectors and also shows the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Claudio or Elizabeth, do you have also comments to share on this question, both specifically or more broadly?
Yeah, about the attempt of coalition building, maybe I can contribute so we as Stop Arming Israel, we are working tight with Gewerkschafterinnen für Gaza, which is trade unions for Palestine. I will share some resources at the end in the chat. And the Jewish Voice, the German Jewish Voice for Peace, the Jüdische Stimme is also very active in support of this initiative. There were attempts in the last year to try to enter the bargaining negotiations. So the renovation of the contracts of the dock workers, for instance, in Hamburg and Bremen. And there were some attempt to bring a political issue of the Palestine Solidarity into the negotiation. It's a beginning. Let's say that is a beginning, and this is a perspective in the long term. Clashing also with the German labor laws, which supposedly are prohibiting the political strike. So the trade union can negotiate only on basis of salary issues and on other issues, but not about political issues. This is a point which is now in discussion. There are voices also arguing that it's not a legal obstacle, but some kind of constitutionary law which belongs to the social partnership of the trade union with with the industrial complex. There are also other examples in which on the other side the networking is difficult, with the IG Metall, for instance, where the metal industry, trade union, which is openly, in the majority of its structure, is openly on the side of the war credits and the new armament. That's why I was. So I think it's crucial for us now to talk about a class perspective, and to question the social partnership in its rules, in its roots, when the ruling class is actually the industry and the governments are heading to the war preparation.
Thank you, Claudio. I would be remiss not to mention and shout out JVP Rhode Island's Break the Bonds campaign in the city of Providence, which has been a really important and really deeply community involved effort to pressure the city to divest from Israeli apartheid, occupation, genocide, colonialism. And I've seen really the whole community across higher ed, labor, students, immigrant rights organizations, JVP, of course, really coming together to build each other up in all of our different campaigns. And I think this speaks to Lizbeth's point about different approaches and using all the approaches and pushing on all the levers of power and influence that we have, and coalitions being a really important way to sustain those efforts. Because sometimes, our orgs kind of get beat down in a moment and we need someone else to step up and carry the movement while we sort of recuperate. And I think in higher eds, we're definitely, in my specific experience at Brown, facing that right now. And I know the community orgs we've built partnerships with have been so important in keeping the momentum going in the city. Just this week, the city of Providence raised a Palestinian flag at City Hall for the first time in history. And we saw an outpouring of that coalitional support and mobilization, and how people showed up, because obviously there were national Zionist efforts to smear and slander, including the mayor of Providence himself, who denounced this act and called it divisive and controversial, despite the fact that the Israeli flag had flown literally the week prior. So just want to upvote the importance of coalition building and thank my partners in the coalitions I've been a part of for really sustaining me and others in that work. Okay, let's move on to another question. I think this is important to address. So next question. All of us in unions here believe we need to reform our unions from below, even horribly conservative unions in the US. Can the Histadrut be reformed from below by its members? I've had a socialist Jewish educator in the US make this argument. Is there any hope anti-Zionist Jewish members of the Histadrut could build a reform movement to change the Histadrut's directions? Or if not, could you elaborate on why? Whoever wants to go, feel free to jump in.
Well, I would say no. And the reason being really the analogy with apartheid South Africa, where you had white unions, white-only unions essentially, that were actually quite militant in regard to fighting for their own members' rights, but which were white-only unions. And that was fundamental to the nature of that society as being a settler colonial society. Now, of course, we live in this country, the United States, in a settler colonial society, but I think there's a difference. And that is, there is none, despite all the racism and oppression and genocide in this country, there is also a tradition that parallel exists of multiracial and multinational labor organizing within, and which a number of unions, were really upholding and have upheld. And certainly the industrial unions that came from the 1930s on have been much more based in that. That doesn't mean that there wasn't racism or isn't racism in those unions. Again, the UIW is notorious going back to the late 60s, in particular, the struggle over racism in that union. And that struggle, of course, is not over. But that's different than a society like apartheid South Africa or the Israeli regime, the Zionist entity, which is a kind of settler colonialism in which there are not, you know, the Histadrut in this case plays the role as the spearhead of the existence of that society and the maintenance of that society. And that's why the Histadrut never has been and never can be an instrument of change or of reform or of ending settler colonialism, because settler colonialism is so baked into its DNA. And that the Israeli so-called working class, by which I mean the Jewish so-called working class, is not a working class in any way that we would recognize, just as the white South African working class was not. And so there's a lot more that can be said about it, but I think that's essentially the reasons why that's not going to happen.
Thank you, Michael. Claudia or Elizabeth, you want to weigh in?
Yes, very, very briefly on Michael. I stay on what Michael said. I agree 100%. I can build up something more, which is also particular for Germany, as I was telling before. So that there is some kind of privilege sharing. So when a working class like the Israeli working class or the German working class is somehow co-opted by the program of the program of the owner of the industry, so the national interest is becoming is coming in foreground. The point is the perspective of a solidarity from below among workers, which is now I said is the crucial point. And I would also not expect anything from the Israeli working class. From the German working class, we have to confront this kind of this cooperation and what I was calling Sozialpartnerschaft, the social partnership of the labor structure. This is the point we have to hit in the next future. When the German industry is complicit in the second line after US is one of the weapon industry enabling genocide in Palestine, the massacre in Ukraine, and so on. Solidarity among workers against the national interests is, I think, the topic.
Thank you, Claudio. Elizabeth, if you have anything to add, go ahead.
I have nothing additional. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say quickly to close on this question that we are living the logical conclusion of what Zionism as an ideology looks like in practice, and it is a genocidal ideology. There's nothing redeemable in Zionism. I really appreciate the question. I appreciate us weighing in on it and reflecting on it carefully. But I do think in the case of Zionism, all of our efforts have to be organized towards dismantling this racist, exterminationist, settler colonial project so that other things can blossom and bloom in its place, right? So I think that's where I stand on that question. And I think other panelists, thank you for your comments also. We're getting close to the end of our time together. So I think it's a good moment maybe for our panelists, if you'd like to just offer some closing remarks, and then I will also do that and just sum up the end of this session and looking towards the next one. So maybe we'll go in the order, or Elizabeth, if you wanted to go first, because I think maybe your time is a bit limited, you can please do so.
Thank you. Yes, I do have to head out to another commitment. But just again, like with everything that we heard today, we see that, there's work to do to break the ties of history. But even with that work, it's important as rank and file for us to organize. This is going to be an effort from the bottom up. And as we do our work, it's also important to make changes within our union, because we see in a lot of our unions what we have, the challenges that we have with leadership. So those are things that we have to address. But as I head out again to meet my coalition, again, I would just stress that, just take, everything that you've heard today and the toolkits that will be made available, and do more. Whatever you are doing now, see what else that you can do and do more, because there is a lot of work to do. There's an urgency of the situation, and all of the letters, all of the papers, documents will not stop what's going on. And it's going to take action, it's going to take building, and that's what we have to do in this moment. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and really leading by example, because I know you literally do the work. So thank you so much. Claudio, do you want to go next?
Yes. So very, very shortly, I want to highlight again the importance, how crucial is the political education, and this is our fight now. The fight against not only against ignorance but also against active disinformation. And let's go on. I hope we will have a long way. We have a long way, and then we will have much of these exchanges. I'm very, very glad to be with you now, and let's go for more.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, what Elizabeth and Claudio and Sherena have been saying, and Manal before them. And to remember that, this is such a difficult moment. I mean, it's been a difficult moment. It's been a difficult moment since 1948 and before, but obviously it's been a especially difficult moment since October 7th of 2023 and the genocide that has, accompanied that. But all of us are affected by that to some degree. I mean, not affected by it directly the way people in Palestine are, but nonetheless, we all, in our own ways, have been experiencing it, and it's sometimes discouraging or can feel discouraging. But I think, we can take inspiration above all from Palestinians and their resistance and Samud, and which is part of that resistance, their steadfastness, and from each other, from uplifting what all of us here are trying to do and beyond here, all the work that is being done. I mean, just one example to take heart from was yesterday in London, there were more than 500,000 people marching for Palestine. And there have been, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in this country that have marched for Palestine since October 7th of 2023. And remembering that, all tyranny eventually can be brought down and will be brought down in injustice. And to take, support each other, to take inspiration from each other, and to move forward together.
Thank you so much. I want to sincerely thank everyone for coming today and participating in this teach-in about the Histadrut, its origins, and the formation of the Zionist state, and its ongoing role in the occupation, colonization, and genocide against the Palestinian people. I want to remind everyone that we organized this call to serve as a teaching tool for unionists to take back to their locals, caucuses, and national federations. So please feel encouraged to share the recording once we circulate it. We're also looking into having some translated subtitles in different languages. organize a watch party and a discussion, and plan together about bringing resolutions to your unions at every level. We'll be sharing a toolkit with participants soon and definitely before our next iteration of this series, which is going to take place on June 22nd. So save the date, where we plan to deepen today's discussion with an examination of internal labor dynamics within Israel, including the mistreatment of Palestinian workers and the history of Palestinian labor within the settler colony, Israel's exploitation of migrant workers, and further connections to global solidarity movements, because we've just really scratched the surface on this really important work happening in this moment that many of you are a part of, and I thank you for that. And, you know, together we're going to continue to hold this line. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.